We hear some squeaking noises in the middle of the zoo where we can see dangerous animals like tigers roaming around inside their habitats. Then, a mop is seen cleaning the dirty floor, and it is being operated by our hero Raynell, who is right next to a cage. She tells us that she is lucky because her manager had asked her to take over his shift due to some last-moment development. Regardless, our hero is more than happy to do this, even though most others would believe that it's a waste of time to do someone else's work. This is because she is totally a fan of wild animals, primarily because they look cool and strong. Whether it's a lion, wolf, or a tiger, our hero is more than happy to be in the company of such majestic creatures because she believes they are perfect beasts. As expected, Raynell continues with his job and comments that her dream has always been to become a zookeeper no matter how dangerous the task might be. This immediately turns out to be a bad sentiment in hindsight, because a mysterious beast appears in front of her and seemingly attacks her without being shown. Suddenly, Raynell opens her eyes and finds herself inside a forest. This doesn't make any sense to her, because she was in the zoo not too long ago. She decides to check her phone for clues, but when she moves her hand, she hears a fluttering sound and gets confused. That's when she realizes that she has actually turned into a crow as she takes a look at her new wings and is totally shocked. She then goes to the river to get a closer look at what's happened to her, and cannot believe the cursed luck she's been given. Raynell tries to figure whether she has been reborn as a crow, or whether her consciousness was simply transferred to one. Frustrated with her situation, our hero lets out a scream, but all that can be heard is a timid caw because of her genetics. Raynell laments the fact that she had to be turned into such a useless creature, whereas in manga story, the hero is usually reincarnated as an overpowered playboy with an endless supply of harem girls. Our hero begins to weep as she curses her luck for not even turning him into a cool beast like a wolf or a lion. Raynell then imagines herself in a surgery room with a doctor and a nurse, but even they say that there's nothing to be done about this body. Our hero tries to talk to the surgeons, but she can only call like the crow she is. Back to reality, Raynell considers her new life and is horrified to learn that she has to change her diet from yummy cooked meals to rodents, vermin, and bugs. As expected, this makes her furious beyond imagination, and she vows to pluck out the eyes of the god who did this to her, although she does maintain that she wouldn't eat the eyes. All hope is not lost though, as Raynell remembers that crows can also eat nuts and fruits. Unfortunately, she is unable to find any of them around, so she decides to use her new body's main power, which is to fly. Raynell spreads her wings and takes off into the sky, feeling amazed by what she is capable of. She feels good now that she has a rush of adrenaline, and wonders if flying to birds is what drugs are to humans. While she ponders about this philosophical question, Raynell hears some distant cries coming from nearby and goes closer to it. She spots some people trying to look for someone, and he figures that she will have a much better life becoming someone's pet rather than scavenging for food. Our hero swoops down, hoping to find a sugar daddy, even though she realizes that crows aren't exactly the most sold pets on the planet. However, as Raynell comes closer to the humans, she notices that they are actually muscular orcs who are looking for their friend. Our hero really can't catch a break, because orcs have no business in the human world. Despite her luck, Raynell figures that she has been transported to a fantasy world, as this place cannot be found on a map. She also realizes that since orcs are popular across all mediums, it's hard to say whether this is a game, novel, manga, or an anime. Regardless, she is thankful to be able to understand what the orcs are saying, because the person they are looking for is not a friend, but rather a foe. This soldier seems to be powerful enough to kill orcs, and it explains why they've come out in numbers to take his head. Raynell senses an opportunity here to find the wanted soldier and warn him about the orcs, so that she can charm him with her behavior and secure him as a sugar daddy. The plan seems to come into immediate effect as Raynell spots a charming blonde boy in the middle of the jungle. He is shown to be injured, and he explains to us that he was ambushed by a count named Faroon who had offered a hunting session to his victim. The blonde prince blames himself for giving in to someone else's trust so easily, because he believes this is all part of a scheme hatched by a villain named Llewellyn. It is hinted that Llewellyn is the same person who had caused Raynell to turn into a crow, as we see his image next to a demon wolf. The blonde warrior laments that he might just meet his end due to his injuries, but then Raynell shows up in her crow body. What's even more interesting is the fact that she seems to have seen this man before and cannot believe her own eyes. The man takes a look at Raynell, but all he can see is a crow, which is believed to be a scavenger bird that likes to feed off dead bodies. He imagines a horrifying image of crows with demon eyes celebrating their association with death, and he worries that he will also be eaten by Raynell. He wants to shoo her away, but is unable to do so because of the orcs nearby. The blonde prince fears that he will call the attention of the orcs, and it only gets worse when Raynell starts to make noise by cawing away. He considers getting rid of Raynell in order to keep the silence, but to his surprise, the crow girl spreads her wings and flies away. This attracts the attention of the orcs, who follow after her, thinking that she will lead them to a body. This is good news for the blonde prince, who wonders if the crow was sent as an angel rather than a demon. Anyway, Raynell is more than happy to lead the stupid orcs away from her Prince Charming, and she continues with her flight. In the middle of this, our hero also tries to remember where she saw the blonde prince, because she's definitely seen him in a game or a manga. The key to surviving in this world is by connecting with this man, so Raynell decides to stick to him, and she tries to convince herself that this is not just because of his good looks. Our hero blushes with excitement while the orcs following her wonder if they are doing the right thing. They eventually decide to stick to their guns, but this was clearly a bad idea, as they are led to a cliff. The orcs argue with each other over who had suggested following the crow, and Raynell simply mocks them for being idiots as she flies away into the bright sky. She is motivated to meet the blonde prince because he is the key to her survival and possible transformation back into her human form. She rushes back to the spot, but doesn't find the blonde prince in his position. He has left behind a trail of blood, and it makes Raynell wonder if she should have focused on his wounds or the orcs. Regardless, she wants to help the blonde prince survive, so she goes to get some herbs which should help stop the bleeding. However, she doesn't really have much knowledge about plants, as wild animals are her area of expertise. Raynell does seem to have an idea of what plants are herbs and what plants are poisonous, so she uses her crow powers to pick the herbs. Of course, she doesn't know if these herbs will help the blonde prince, but she will worry about that later, because something is better than nothing. As she figures her rescue mission, we move to the blonde prince who is showing off his Chad bod while cleaning his wound next to nearby river. He is happy because his body scent will not be found so easily by the orcs anymore, and he only has Raynell to thank for this, as he would have definitely died fighting the orcs with his wounded body. It's a bit ironic that he was saved by the symbol of death, but life works in mysterious ways. So the blonde prince makes a plan to escape the orcs and move to a safer place. He is then surprised to see some medicinal herbs falling onto his head, and he looks up to see Raynell waving at him with a crow smile. The blonde prince cannot believe his luck, and he is certain that a crow cannot be so intelligent. He comes up with a few theories, believing that the crow might be someone's familiar, or even a polymorph dragon. But there is no time to play guessing games, so he assumes that his theories are wrong because such creatures are extremely rare to find. The blonde prince gets dressed, but is still curious about the crow and why she is helping him. Raynell literally adds the cherry to the cake when she drops some berries in front of her new master, and he picks them up, assuming this is a gift. The new couple seems to understand each other's words and actions, so the blonde prince eats the berries and enjoys the sweetness. The both of them are now close buddies, and they carry out their survival together in the jungle. While Raynell brings herbs and fruits for her new master, he hunts down animals and feeds them to her. This is great for our hero, as she no longer has to worry about eating bugs. Eventually, the blonde prince starts calling her by her name, and this makes her blush even with her black crow face. This feeling is so amazing that it makes Raynell wonder as if a K-pop idol is calling out to her. She melts out of love and even admits to being an easy crow for her man to violate. On the other hand, the blonde prince feels very comfortable around Raynell and pets her out of love. She is visibly enjoying the gesture a bit too much, and it makes the blonde prince consider abandoning his life in the imperial palace because people have been using him for their own advantage over there for far too long. However, he remembers that his knights died fighting for him, and he owes them that much to go back and fight Llewellyn before he takes over the kingdom and all the innocent people living in it. After being sure that he will return to the imperial palace, the blonde prince mentions that Llewellyn might have already declared him to be dead in order to take over all his property and belongings. He then talks about a hidden power inside him that he must awaken if he is to emerge victorious over the evil villain. We learn that this power is of the imperial family, and it is the ability to turn into a wolf. It starts to get dark, and Raynell wonders if she should go fetch some more herbs, but then she notices something shiny in the forest. It appears to be a precious jewel, but our hero is too far away to make a fair judgment. Raynell isn't too keen on taking this jewel because she'd much rather look for food and herbs, but the problem is that she's in a crow's body, which means that she has some natural instinct. These instincts take over her body, and Raynell rushes down to play with the jewel, even though she believes this is highly ridiculous. Our hero laments that she has to do such silly things even though she is a proper human, and she demands to have her body back. However, she quickly identifies that her new toy is not a jewel, but rather a precious berry which has the ability to awaken hidden characters or powers. Raynell knows this because she saw this berry in a game, and it changes the final result of the game depending on who she gives it to. Our hero also explains that if the berry remains with a person who isn't very likable, then they meet a cruel fate such as getting locked up for a crime they didn't commit. Now, Raynell reveals that she was on the receiving end of many such cruel fates as it took her a whole year to give the berry to someone else, so that she could complete the game. Our hero suddenly remembers that she played this game over 3 years ago, so she doesn't remember much from it. She then curses the gods because she feels like she is being used as a joker in a comedy show for these gods. Raynell might not remember the game's name, but she does remember her master's name, and she finally reveals it to be Ivel. It turns out that he was a side character in the same game, and he was the emperor of the kingdom as well. However, as per the current scenario, Ivel still appears to be a prince on the run, so there's time for Raynell to experience a life of luxury. Raynell feels bad for her master as she remembers his troubles during the game, and then she decides to give him the shiny berry. This might help Ivel awaken his wolf powers and make him take hold of his kingdom once again. Our hero believes that if he is able to do this, then he might even use his authority and power to send her back to her world where she can be happy with wild animals once again. Raynell takes the berry to Ivel, and he is shocked to see it because even the Lord Majesty cannot get his hands on something so rare. The blonde prince is now certain of the fact that Raynell is not a simple crow, but rather a dragon, or something not from this world. He knows that if he eats this berry, then his fate will take a turn, but it can go either way, so it's a huge risk. Despite knowing that he might die from eating the berry, Ivel does so, but not before he asks Raynell to live a free life if he ends up passing away. Now, the blonde prince is overcome by a sense of immense power as he starts to glow in front of Raynell. She remembers how much of a playboy he became when she was playing the game, but shifts the focus back to how powerful the blonde prince is becoming because of the berry. The glow is so strong that it even drives the nearby birds away, but it also attracts some beast men who look like hyenas with a bad haircut. Raynell is confused as to what she should do in this situation, and thinks about flying away to safety, because she is confident that Ivel will complete his awakening and turn into an overpowered werewolf. However, she also remembers the kind words he just said to her, and it makes our hero simp for her prince. She decides to keep the hyena men distracted with her flapping powers, and even though it isn't anything of use, Raynell only needs to maintain this distraction long enough for Ivel to awaken his powers. text pops up to explain to us how Llewellyn was worshipped as the third prince simply because he had awakened his wolf powers. However, all these praises only made him more complacent, and he didn't make any efforts towards improving his attitude. His arrogance could be seen in the way he would always enjoy himself with harem women, and his lack of maturity raised serious doubts about his character. Now, we move back to the confrontation between Ivel and Llewellyn, where the blonde prince reveals himself to be the narrator. He also mocks the third prince because he is unable to pick up on the fact that his wolf powers have awakened. This is exactly why Llewellyn cannot be expected to be the next in line to succeed the throne. Of course, all of these thoughts are only in Ivel's head because he doesn't want to raise any alarms. However, he does have some fun when he apologizes to his brother for all the trouble he went through. This is clearly sarcasm, as Ivel even states that the search party sent out to look for him was nothing more than a waste of time and resources. The third prince is visibly nervous, but he also doesn't want to expose his evil plans, so he simply smiles and pleads ignorance to whatever Ivel is telling him. The blonde prince doesn't have time to argue with his brother now, but he's ready to give him a taste of his own medicine soon enough. Ivel walks past Llewellyn and says that he'll finish their little chat later because he has to go meet the king right now. The tension is so thick between the brothers that it can be cut with a knife. Ivel comments that things are going to get very interesting for Llewellyn, and then he proceeds towards his father. Now, we see a couple of guards waiting by the door, and they immediately kneel in subjugation towards his majesty. The blonde prince enters his father's room and proudly announces that he has returned. The king is glad to learn that the first prince has come back to the royal palace, but he doesn't look like he's doing very well. The king battles his sickness and gives his son a smile, but Ivel is concerned about his father's health, so he asks him how he's doing. The king simply replies by saying he's the same. And there's no point in all this small talk because what Ivel is fearing isn't going to happen anytime soon. The king proceeds to say that Ivel has only just hatched out of his egg, hinting that he can sense his son's wolf powers. He also comments that it is Ivel's emotions that let his brother get the better of him. The blonde prince is impressed to see how quickly the king was able to spot his powers, and he mocks Llewellyn in his head but acts innocent when he speaks. This only leads the king to show the typical face of a stern dad, and he calls Ivel a fool. The blonde prince simply laughs and says that such incidents are not going to repeat themselves again. Now, it's time for some serious talk, and Ivel reassures his father that he is going to succeed the throne with great success. However, he also looks him straight in the eye and says that he wants this to happen so that the king can finally meet his queen in the afterlife. These words take the king by surprise, so he calls Ivel a rascal, but the blonde prince simply states that he has always been this way. The father and son joke around for a bit, and then Ivel walks away, but he also imagines what life would have been like if his mom didn't pass away from her illness. He believes the fight for the crown would have been more moderate if she was still alive, but there's no point in crying over spilled milk. A golden aura surrounds the blonde prince as he walks away and announces he's leaving the room. However, this leads the king to start laughing in a strange manner, although this is simply because he can now see potential in Ivel. He starts talking to himself, but it appears as if he's communicating with his dead queen, wishing for her to be alive to see how much her son has changed. That's when we see the queen, who is beautiful beyond belief, explaining why it wasn't hard for Ivel to charm Rhaenel. The queen approaches her king and states that a wolf only has one partner for life. However, when the partner would die, it would lead the wolf to also fall sick and eventually meet her in heaven. This is exactly what's going on with the king right now. And then we see him wishing for Ivel to get what he truly deserves so that he can finally die in peace, rather than fighting for his life just so that he can offer guidance to his son. He has a romantic vision of being with his wife and yearns to be with her again so that their bond can continue to grow, even in heaven. After this heavily emotional sequence, we move back to Ivel's room, where our favorite crow girl is still in her cage. It doesn't take long for her to entertain us again as she complains about being hungry. Her beak starts to water and she starts thinking about how long it's been since Ivel left. She knows that birds can digest their food almost instantly, which is why her hunger feels as if it's been going on for days. On top of that, Rhaenel also complains about the butler, who wasn't able to give her anything to eat apart from some disgusting worms. The poor butler can only look on in confusion over Rhaenel's reluctance to eat the worms, while she wonders if he wants her to starve to death. A dramatic display of tears follows as our hero sobs in her crow voice and wishes for her lover boy to return as soon as possible. However, there's nobody coming to save her from this terrible diet, so she takes a peek into her worm bowl. It's not a very appetizing sight, but Rhaenel is at her wit's end due to her hunger. She even thinks about taking a bite as her beak continues to drool like a waterfall of saliva. Rhaenel continues the debate in her mind by saying she technically has a crow's organs, so it shouldn't be that hard for her to enjoy the worms. She places some faith in her taste organs, but then her human form manifests itself as a funny soul and punches her crow body. This snaps her back into her senses, and she can't believe the fact that she had even considered eating the worms. Rhaenel might be thinking like a human right now, but it won't be long before her crow desires take over again. She worries that she'll end up eating the worms if Ivel doesn't come to the rescue soon. Luckily, a hand pats her from behind and it's none other than her dashing prince. Ivel is shocked to see Raynell in such a horrible state and comments on how thin she's become in such a short span of time. The blonde prince is aware that his crow doesn't like eating bugs, so he immediately orders the butler to go and fetch some raw meat and fruits. Our hero finally gets some respite when she eats a proper meal and even gets to top it off with some tasty cooking. Raynell is thankful to have maintained her humanity. But then she's in for an even bigger surprise when Ivel invites her into his bed. The crow girl wonders what's going on, but then Ivel says he wants to give her some toys to play with. He opens up a treasure chest and reveals a collection of precious stones that light up the place. Raynell is shocked to see these gems and is blinded by the shiny lights. She wonders how much these gems must be costing, but of course, it wouldn't mean much to a prince like Ivel. Raynell laments that she is a crow who is associated with death, but also feels very loved by Ivel. She starts to fantasize about him loving her as a human, which would ideally be the perfect ending for her. However, our hero breaks the fourth wall once again and says that the manga is not going to turn her into a human. She even knows what episode we're on, but gets interrupted when Ivel asks her if she likes his gift. His gesture lights up her mood and she's thankful to have become Ivel's trusted bird. It could have been a lot worse for Raynell, so she decides to take things slowly, one day at a time, and picks up a gem. She gives this gem to Ivel, who is so touched by her gesture that his face begins to glow with joy. Raynell finds this a bit odd as a prince shouldn't be so easy to please. The blonde prince proceeds to give his crow girl a hug and promises to make her the imperial crow once he becomes the king of his empire. Raynell simply gives us a hilariously evil glance and says that this is just the beginning of her plan to make Ivel fall in love with her. The next day, our hero wakes up and stretches her wings to full effect against the backdrop of a pleasant morning. There are tons of rooms in the palace, so Raynell knows she won't get bored so easily. She goes outside to get some fresh air and enjoys the vibe while a guard gets startled by her presence. The guard gets worried that a bird of death is roaming around in the king's garden, so he decides to shoo her away. However, he gets stopped by Ivel, who tells him not to lay a hand on Raynell as she is very dear to him. The guard finds this to be a bit odd, but runs away because he doesn't want to upset the blonde prince. The coast is clear for now, but Ivel knows that this was a close call because Raynell could have easily gotten hurt right now. He realizes that he can't always be there for his crow girl, so he needs to put some kind of marker so that the others will know to treat her like a princess. Ivel's train of thought is interrupted when he hears someone approaching, and it turns out to be Llewellyn. The third prince acts snobby and arrogant, which makes Ivel sense something off about the situation. Raynell also notices him, so she comes up with her own hostile hashtags even though social media isn't a thing here. Ivel decides to enter savage mode and he asks Llewellyn why he's come here to see him when he could have simply sent someone in his place. He proceeds to mock his brother's abundance of free time, but the third prince answers back by saying he simply wants to spend time with his family. Now, we learn that the youngest member of the royal family is a girl named Sephia. Llewellyn tells Ivel that he only likes to spend time with Sephia because he thinks she's cute and sweet. Ivel isn't too pleased to hear this, and the tension grows thicker between the brothers. Raynell can also see this, and she gets worried about what's going to happen. However, the third prince decides to cut the small talk and get down to business. It turns out that Llewellyn has found out about Ivel promising to stop the battle for the crown, but the blonde prince simply acts tough and says it's about time this was decided. His words seem to get a rise out of Llewellyn, and he expresses his emotions by saying Ivel hasn't even awakened his wolf powers yet. However, the blonde prince isn't one to back down from a fight, and he taunts his brother for being unable to seize the throne even though he had awakened his powers before him. Ivel is absolutely ruthless in destroying the third prince with his words, and he also throws in a hint of sass which makes Raynell treat this confrontation like a 3D movie. She munches on popcorn and comes up with a new hashtag, because this scene reminds her of K-dramas. Ivel isn't quite done yet, as he berates Llewellyn for not being able to seize the throne even though he had gone missing for a considerable amount of time. This is all it takes to trigger the third prince, so he transforms into his wolf avatar and unleashes his powers upon Ivel. It's a deadly scene that makes the blonde prince wonder what he should do. He admits that he didn't anticipate such a situation, but he also doesn't want to reveal his wolf powers yet. Just as things are about to get serious, we witness something rather puzzling. Raynell attacks the wolf prince with all her might in a hilarious sequence and attacks him with her beak. It confuses Ivel, but then our hero reminds us that she managed to hold off the orcs who had attacked Ivel earlier. The whole situation is very funny, but Ivel knows that his crow girl won't be able to last long against Llewellyn. The wolf prince attacks our hero with full power, but then Ivel comes to the rescue and attacks him with a kick. The blonde prince proceeds to ridicule his brother by saying he's the size of a dog, and on top of that, he also got bullied by a crow. The sass goes overboard, so Llewellyn tries to snap back at his brother and even insults Raynell for attacking his face. However, Ivel scolds him once more and says that he is stronger than the third prince even though his power hasn't awakened yet. Of course, Ivel is bluffing about his wolf powers, And then he mocks Llewellyn for not being strong because he seems to be a dog rather than a wolf. The third prince promises revenge, and it makes Ivel consider the political situation. He realizes that his brother still has a lot of followers, so he shouldn't try anything funny just yet. The blonde prince then invites Raynell to come to him, but rather than thanking her, he scolds the crow girl, much to her unpleasant surprise. She even cutely says that Llewellyn was the one who started it. Now, Ivel takes Raynell to his room and explains to her that she shouldn't have attacked Llewellyn, no matter how stupid he might have been. His intentions are good because he fears that the third prince might target Raynell now that she has hurt his pride. However, the crow girl decides to use her cuteness overload powers, and it makes the blonde prince feel bad for scolding her. He does manage to pull himself together and tells Raynell that she shouldn't be so reckless because she's risking her life by doing this. Ivel also brings up the incident with the orcs, and our hero realizes that he's saying the right thing. As far as the fight with Llewellyn is concerned, Raynell explains to us that she's read up on wolves and their weaknesses before, so she knew how to hurt the third prince. Her crow reflexes also helped with the situation, but our hero acknowledges that she did come across as reckless, just like the time she was clumsy as a human with her dog. After realizing Ivel's intentions, Raynell gently touches his hand with her beak and says sorry. Ivel acknowledges her gesture and reassures her that he will always protect her because his wolf powers have awakened now. He carries on with the assumption that Raynell is just an intelligent crow, and not a dragon, so he tells her that he doesn't want to lose her to a loser like Llewellyn. Meanwhile, the third prince has a hissy fit and he wrecks his room in a fit of rage over the humiliation he's just had to face. Of course, he blames the crow girl for most of it as he remembers the hilarious attack on him, and then he envisions a future where he is the king. Llewellyn now makes it his first goal to exterminate all the crows from the kingdom once he takes the crown, but then something comes to his mind. Ivel had stepped in to save Raynell, when he could have simply just watched the battle for his amusement. This makes Llewellyn think of something evil, and then he looks into his mirror to give a command. Suddenly, a demonic old man appears from the mirror, and the third prince orders him to look into the relationship between Ivel and Raynell. Then, we move to our heroes as the blonde prince writes a letter with the crow girl resting on his shoulders. Our hero is a little tired and wants to go to sleep, but then someone at the door announces the arrival of a marquess named Namiel. Ivel lets him in and Raynell becomes alert because she's heard this name before. Now, Namiel enters the room and says that he's brought an item that Ivel had requested. The blonde prince welcomes Namiel into his room, but Raynell has other plans. So she flies to the Marquess and assesses him with a deadly glare. She proceeds to give us an intro on Namiel, starting with his profession, which is that of a magician. It turns out that Namiel was the hero of the original game, and Raynell clearly seemed to like how handsome he was in the illustrations. She's even happier to see him in person and is thankful to this fantasy world for showing her handsome men everywhere. Raynell is so smitten by Namiel that she starts showing him love without even acknowledging Ivel's presence. The magician is pleasantly surprised by this behavior and comments on how friendly the crow girl is. However, the blonde prince doesn't take too kindly to this shameless betrayal and gets up from his seat. He is shocked to see Raynell so comfortable with someone other than him, and it clearly makes him jealous. Now, Ivel angrily marches towards the crow girl and tells her to stop bothering Namiel. She realizes that she might have let her feelings get the better of her, so she calms down and goes back to Ivel. Our hero cutely says sorry to her lover boy and even tries to say that she's a loyal crow who would never cheat on her Prince Charming. These words have no effect on Ivel as he holds her beak and says they are going to have a chat later. Namiel finds Raynell fascinating and he wants to dissect her, but Ivel takes her away and asks for the item he had requested. The magician reveals a precious gem inside a necklace and comments that it must be for someone very precious to the blonde prince. This makes Raynell is still shocked to learn that Ivel has someone special in his life and is unable to come to terms with the fact that she's not his number one girl. She begins to cry out of hilarious sadness after imagining a world where her blonde prince has left her alone to marry another woman. Of course, the crow girl always has her imagination to come to her rescue, so she fantasizes about Ivel promising her that he'll never leave her alone. However, even her own mind plays tricks on her as the fake Ivel asks Raynell to become his child rather than his babe. This makes our hero cry a river of tears in a dramatic presentation, and she even gives herself the hashtag crow in distress. Of course, all of this is just an unnecessary burst of emotions as the blonde prince simply presents the highly expensive necklace to the crow girl and reveals that the special person in his life is in fact Raynell. Our hero is overjoyed to see this and cannot control her excitement now that she knows there's no other woman in her lover boy's life. The crow girl celebrates her new present, but the giant necklace grows smaller and fits her perfectly. That's when Namiel reveals that Ivel had actually asked him to get a necklace that could adjust its size based on the person wearing it. The blonde prince states that he actually ordered for the necklace so that everyone in the palace would know how precious Raynell is to him. Our hero is over the moon and she showers her love upon her lover boy. But then Ivel tells Namiel not to show any further interest in his crow. The magician boy has no intention of making his prince upset, but Ivel still suspects something, so he asks Namiel what he wants. This leads to a slightly awkward conversation where Namuel reveals that he doesn't want the future king to think badly of him because it will not lead to a happy ending. Ivel doesn't have time to play games with Namuel, so he asks him to get straight to the point. Now, the magician states that his father asked him not to get into politics. Despite this, he still mentions how his father's wolf powers never awakened, and this was why he never even looked towards the direction of the imperial palace. He goes on to explain that he wanted to follow his father's advice but wasn't able to do so because of Llewellyn. It turns out that the third prince had actually forced Namuel to become a magician and serve under him. But this was simply because he viewed magicians as tools and would use them for his entertainment. Namuel does not want the future king to be a spoiled brat, which is why he's placing his bet on Ivel for now. All of this sounds good in theory, but the blonde prince has seen way too many examples of people being hungry for power. He asks Namuel how he can place so much trust in him, and even says that he might become like his brother after spending too much time as a king. Raynell is confused after hearing this, but figures that Ivel might be testing Namuel's faith with such words. The magician feels the same way because he knows that Ivel would never think in such a manner. Anyway, Namuel decides to offer the ultimate gesture of goodwill and presents a berry to Ivel. However, this is the same berry that Raynell had given her lover boy earlier, which helped awaken his wolf powers. Seeing this makes our hero panic, because her memories start to come back to her. She believes that in the original game, Namuel was the one who had helped Ivel awaken his wolf powers by giving him this exact same berry. Of course, this makes the crow girl very anxious because she has already done this, and it makes her wonder if she has kicked off some kind of butterfly effect. Tensions run high, but Ivel knows what he's doing, so he asks Namuel to eat the berry instead. The magician does acknowledge that he has royal blood flowing through him, which means that he might be able to awaken his powers after eating the berry. However, he would much rather prefer to remain a magician rather than become an overpowered wolf. The blonde prince is more than impressed to see someone pass on the opportunity to eat the rare berry, so he acknowledges Namuel as a noble supporter. The magician wants confirmation from the blonde prince as to whether he is now a trusted aide, and Ivel proudly promises to fund him for anything he wants once he becomes the emperor of his kingdom. In return, even Namuel offers his prince all his abilities and knowledge and also asks him to speak in a more casual tone. He jokes that he might be of royal blood, but is nothing more than a commoner in front of the blonde prince. Ivel happily agrees to this, and then he has a look at the rare berry. He wonders who he should give this berry to because it has to be someone who can never betray him under any circumstance. He has to be careful, because he is playing with immense power over here, so his attention turns to Raynell, who is the only person worthy of his trust. This is a tricky situation for Ivel because he doesn't know how the berry will react to a crow, but at the same time, it makes him curious. On a completely different note, the crow girl is still worrying about the butterfly effect she has kicked off. Then, in a hilarious sequence, she gets drawn to the berry and feels a strange aura take over her body. This leads Raynell to snatch the berry from Ivel and swallow it, even though he warns her that it might kill her. The crow girl now has an overpowered berry inside her tummy, and it makes the blonde prince panic. He doesn't want to lose his crow girl, so he hilariously opens her mouth and begs her to spit and not swallow. He promises to do anything the crow girl desires, and then he has a panic attack. Ivel cannot stand the thought of losing Raynell because she is the only person who has ever shown him true love. The situation actually gets a little too dramatic, and then Ivel hugs Raynell, hoping for the best. However, after such an intense session, the only thing that our hero does is burp in Ivel's face. The blonde prince is a bit surprised by this, because a berry as powerful as this one should have brought out some kind of response. That doesn't happen to be the case, so Ivel can breathe a sigh of relief for now. He begs Raynell never to swallow anything so abruptly, and then the crow girl comes back to her own senses. It turns out that she had actually passed out after eating the berry, but doesn't feel anything weird yet. Her body is also the same, so there's no reason for her to worry, apart from the possible timeline mess she created earlier. However, Raynell is actually a little disappointed because she wanted to awaken her own powers and become like a Godzilla version of a crow. She even thinks of a catchy name for her movie and calls it Crowzilla, The Revenge of the Bird of Death. However, this is no time to joke around, so she casually chills on the bed and wonders if she is actually the female protagonist of this story alongside Ivel. There's always a calm before the storm, so Raynell's body starts hurting in a similar fashion to how Ivel's did when his wolf powers had awakened. The blonde prince is visibly concerned to see his crow girl in pain, so he pats her with love, but nothing seems to happen. The worst part is that Raynell isn't even transforming, which means her power is not coming to life. Basically, our hero just has an upset stomach, and Ivel tells her that this is why she shouldn't just swallow anything she likes. Anyway, the blonde prince has to heal his crow, so he calls his wizard doctor to do his thing. However, the wizard says that there's nothing wrong with Raynell because her body is not reacting to his healing spells. Our hero is looking worse than a zombie, so Ivel can only think of one possible reason for her fever. He acts fast and tells his doctor to leave them alone. The blonde prince then sulks on the bed and blames himself for causing pain and suffering to Raynell. He believes he shouldn't have been too casual with the berry in front of his crow girl and wonders what's going to happen next. He can't really do anything now, but wait and watch what happens with Raynell, who is clearly not looking like she's having a good time. Ivel only feels worse with each passing moment and can't deal with the pain of seeing his trusted bird in such a state. He begs Raynell to wake up from her fever and even says that he'll allow her to play tricks on him for as long as she wants. Unfortunately, our hero doesn't open her eyes, so Ivel falls asleep next to her in bed. The scene suddenly shifts to a starry galaxy where we see an angel girl who is revealed to be Raynell. She takes a look at her hands and is shocked to see that they aren't crow wings. All of this makes her think that she has died from consuming the berry, and she is clearly upset with the way things have gone for her because she still wants to live. Our hero goes on a rant talking about how her life as a crow wasn't the best and also laments the fact that she didn't even do anything with her lover boy, other than a few hugs and kisses. This is not the end for Raynell as a giant flash of light appears in front of her and we see a bright sequence that is mixed with alternate images of a crow spreading its wings. This is a bit confusing for Raynell, but then she opens her eyes to a narrative voice that explains how a giant black bird ended up helping a wolf overcome his troubles and gain a new perspective. As part of their partnership, the bird would feast on corpses that were given some power by the wolf. This was to ensure that when such creatures would pass away, their bodies wouldn't cover the land. Basically, the corpses would not be a burden to the living as a result of this, and then the narrative text explains that the blackbird gave birth to smaller birds which would go on to be called crows. These crows would scatter pieces of their shells all over the world so that someday, their descendants would eat these pieces and awaken their inner powers. By now, we've gotten the hint that these shell pieces are in fact the power berries. After Raynell is given this explanation, she is hit with a burst of energy and then an intense sequence follows. We move back to the real world where Ivel is still by the bed, but then he wakes up to the sound of some fluttering wings. He tries to come back to his senses and wonders if Raynell is alright. But when he looks at the bed, he sees something he never would have imagined. We can see that Raynell has finally transformed from a crow girl to an actual girl and is sleeping peacefully in bed. Ivel is clearly shocked to see her and wants to know who this is because he's clearly never seen our hero in her human form. Ivel has to consider all possible situations, so he wonders if the crow girl is actually an assassin. However, after he takes a look at her soft hands, he realizes that can't be the case. More than anything else, it doesn't make sense for an assassin to sleep next to her target, but the most important thing is that Raynell is wearing the same necklace her lover boy had gifted her through Namuel. It is this sight that makes the blonde prince wonder if this is actually his crow girl in her human form. Ivel places his hands on our hero's hair and comments that it feels exactly like his crow's feathers. He wonders if this transformation has happened because of the power berry. But then things get interesting when Raynell finally wakes up. She asks Ivel if it's time to eat and is quick to notice that she is rubbing her eyes with human fingers, and not crow wings. Our hero realizes that she is indeed a human now, but instead of hugging or kissing her lover boy, the first thing she wants to do is check out a mirror. Raynell is just as funny as a human, so Ivel has to calm her down and take her to his mirror. He lets the crow girl take a good look at herself and even smiles at her to reassure our hero of his intentions. Raynell is unable to believe what she's seeing because she has clearly gotten an amazing glow up from what she used to look like on Earth. With silky smooth skin and the hair of a crow goddess, Raynell wonders if this is because of the power berry she ate. Despite this, she is not sure if her power has awakened and feels frail in her body. More than anything else, she's actually upset because she doesn't have any of the strength she had gained from her time at the zoo lifting feed and handling animals. Ivel has no idea what his crow girl is talking about, but she continues to complain in a funny and cute fashion. She tries to look at the positive side because she has finally become a human after all the stress she had to go through as a crow. She is thankful that she doesn't have to go inside cages or eat smelly worms anymore, but she is also happy that she can finally get romantic with her lover boy in the way she had imagined. Ivel is right behind our hero and he looks at her with a charming smile, after which he asks her if she's done examining herself. Raynell is overcome with emotions and she is happy to finally be able to say whatever she wants to the blonde prince. She makes the most of her opportunity and rushes to hug Ivel out of relief. The blonde prince is a bit taken aback by this gesture, but Raynell doesn't care because she can finally call out his name as much as she wants. It takes a while, but the crow girl finally calms down and Ivel asks her if she's feeling better. Her eyes are hilariously puffy due to all the excessive and dramatic crying, so the blonde prince asks her why she was getting so emotional in the first place. He wants to know if it was because of this sudden transformation, but Raynell dismisses that suggestion. Our hero does a quick recap of everything that has happened with her right from when she had transformed into a crow in a fantasy world till this very moment where she is back to being a human, although in a much more beautiful form. Of course, this is not going to sound very pleasant coming from her mouth, because nobody wants to be told that they're a character in a game where their only purpose is to suffer for the sake of entertainment. Also, the story is a bit too long to explain, so Raynell decides against it. Instead, she comes up with another story and tells Ivel that she was scared because she had almost died from the power of the berry. To her surprise, The blonde prince says that he was also scared for her, and the world went dark for him the entire time he was by her side. He is relieved that not only has Raynell opened her eyes, but now she is able to talk to him as well. The charming prince brings out one of his playboy moves and pulls our hero into his arms. He is happy to have her by his side and even thanks her for making it through, safe and sound. As can be expected, this makes Raynell blush with excitement and she loses her mind. Our hero starts making weird noises and even feels dizzy from the rush of emotions. Ivel was charming enough to her when she was a crow, but now that she has a human perspective, all she wants to do is pounce on him and ravage him like a beast. Raynell tells us that these thoughts are only partly true, but we can safely assume what she's thinking. Our hero is a little insecure because Ivel is much better looking than she is, but the blonde prince thinks that she's feeling awkward because of their hugging position. He wants to know if he's making his crow girl feel uncomfortable, and then Raynell states that he's making her feel like an animal. Our hero must act fast, otherwise her heart will explode out of excitement, so she wishes to become a crow again just to feel calmer. Her wish surprisingly comes true, as Raynell instantly turns back into her crow form, much to everyone's surprise. Our hero is now crying in yet another comedy of errors as she wonders what has just happened to her, especially when things were going so well between her and Ivel. Now, Raynell starts flapping her wings in an erratic sequence, because she cannot believe that she's become a crow again. She wonders if this was all just a dream, or even worse, a trial run for her to become human. Since our hero loves to imagine dramatic situations, she thinks of her human body as a product which can only be purchased from the App Store at a premium price. After the excessively funny imaginings, Raynell wonders if she has to pay more cash in order to extend her time in the human body. She cannot control the disappointment anymore and starts to act crazy, hoping that she will get her body back. In the middle of this, Ivel does his best to keep her calm in this moment of truth. The blonde prince then consoles his crow girl and explains that she must have simply changed back into her bird form because of excitement. He even reassures her that she can freely become a human again, as long as she practices for long enough. This is intriguing for our hero, so her lover boy decides to give her a tutorial. He places Raynell on the bed and shows off his own transformation into a glamorous wolf. Ivel is graceful, even as a beast, and it makes Raynell give him a handsome new hashtag. Of course, the crow girl goes wild with joy and blushes through her black feathers. She comments that wolves are supposed to be scary and intimidating, but that isn't the case with Ivel, because he looks so good with his golden fur. This isn't everything though, because the wolf prince proceeds to lick Raynell's beak, which is as good as a kiss in beast language. Our hero reacts funnily to the gesture and it makes Ivel laugh, after which he turns back into his human form without any effort. He explains that this trick is quite easy to pull off, but Raynell doesn't agree with him at all. This is puzzling for the blonde prince. But our hero realizes that he is a genius who finds everything to be easy. Now, Ivel tries another trick and asks Raynell to think about becoming a human because he had thought about becoming a wolf. Our hero acts grumpy at first, and it makes the blonde prince wonder if he's doing this right. However, this trick works out because Raynell becomes a human again. She is amazed by this new development and Ivel soaks in the glory by saying it was easy all along. Now, the crow girl finally gets to munch on a luxury breakfast, and she has a blast with the yummy meal. She is clearly having the time of her life, because it's been a while since she's had human food. Ivel understands this, so he allows Raynell to take her time for now. The blonde prince notices that his crow girl is able to use her cutlery quite easily, so he asks her if she's done this before. Our hero realizes that she let her emotions get the better of her, because she is supposed to keep her past life a secret. However, she is able to act fast and tells Ivel that she managed to pick up on it by watching him eat. Raynell finishes her meal and makes sure to be more careful before revealing her human traits. Ivel needs to call a maid to clean up the meal, so he asks Raynell to turn into a crow for a moment. Our hero is able to pull off this transformation smoothly, and she celebrates her new powers while her lover boy gets the table cleaned by his maid. Raynell also realizes that there are certain advantages she has as a crow, and if she puts in the right amount of effort, then she can be an extremely useful person by utilizing both her forms. She lets her thoughts get the better of her and becomes a savage crow, thinking that Ivel wants to keep her human form a secret so that he can use her as his secret weapon. The maid leaves the room, and our hero becomes human again, but Ivel apologizes to her for hiding her true form. He goes on to ask his crow girl for a favor, and she already imagines becoming a crow in black, spying for her lover boy. Things take a much darker turn when Raynell imagines becoming a maid so that she can assassinate Llewellyn, but she also confesses that she'd much rather be a spy because killing people is scary. However, Ivel doesn't want any favors for himself, but rather, he wants his crow girl to look out for herself. Raynell is amazed that her lover boy doesn't want to make use of her powers, but Ivel is a noble man and he says that he doesn't want Llewellyn to get his hands on her. He explains that his brother has always tried to steal whatever he liked, so Raynell might not be safe in the palace while she's in her human form. Raynell is touched by Ivel's concern, and gets totally smitten when he pulls her close and promises to make this palace a safe place for his crow girl, regardless of her form. The blonde prince is too charming to resist, so Raynell also acts cute and tugs at his collars. She tells her lover boy that she wants to help him achieve his dream. Her words light up a spark in Ival's eyes and he gives his crow girl a warm, tight hug. All of this is Raynell wakes up surrounded by dark energy and wonders where she has reached. The crow girl is visibly injured and she opens her eyes to see Llewellyn scolding his archmage for hurting her. The third prince is annoyed because he didn't want Raynell to get wounded, but the archmage reasons that Raynell had put up a fight, which was why he had to hurt her. Our hero recognizes the voices in front of her, but isn't able to see the face of the archmage, whom she already assumes is ugly. In a state of panic, the archmage asks Llewellyn if he should get a priest to heal Raynell, but he says there's no need to do such a thing. This is because the third prince knows that the crow girl might run away if she heals from her injuries. Llewellyn shows off an evil face, but this only makes Raynell wonder why he's always trying to show that he's a rotten villain all the time. She comments that the third prince might be thinking of himself as a great villain simply by showing how evil and corny he really is. Our hero even imagines a hilarious image of Llewellyn jumping out of a trash can while claiming himself to be a god. The crow girl simply calls her kidnappers tacky and pathetic, after which Llewellyn tells the archmage to leave the room because he does not want to be interrupted for the time being. The archmage does as he's told and then Llewellyn walks towards Raynell. He holds her up by her wounded wing and strikes an evil pose as he calls her his new pet. Raynell wants him to let her go, but all he can hear are her cawing sounds, so he says that he'd love to punish the crow girl for scratching his nose earlier. However, he is willing to let this go if Raynell becomes a human and promises to stay by his side. Llewellyn offers her the world as he believes he is going to become the future emperor and states that an ominous bird of death would never receive such an honor anywhere else. Of course, the third prince thinks that he's being a total boss right now, but our hero thinks otherwise. She realizes that Llewellyn has fallen for her human form, which is why he has kidnapped her. This prompts Raynell to hilarious crow slap the third prince with her wing and she comments on how he doesn't have any friends. The crow girl firmly believes that a person like Llewellyn would never be able to survive in the human world because he is nothing more than a simple loser boy. The third prince isn't pleased that he has been humiliated once again by the same crow, so he throws her into a cage and mocks her for disobeying him. Llewellyn is upset because Raynell still considers Ival to be her owner, and says that the blonde prince failed to protect her when she needed him the most. However, our hero catches on to the fact that the third prince called his brother powerless. This means that Llewellyn has no idea that the blonde prince has awakened his wolf powers, meaning Ival's earlier assumption of the video devices not recording his transformation was correct. Raynell tells us that she could have kept a better watch on the people entering her lover boy's room if she'd known about the video devices earlier. However, it's too late now and there's no point in crying over spilled milk. Our hero figures that the archmage was too powerful to have his spell detected, so there wasn't anything she could have done anyway. Instead, she tries to figure out a way to escape her new prison. However, there is a new difficulty at this level because Llewellyn has cast a spell on this secret room, which means that only those who are given permission can enter it. Basically, Ival will not be able to find this room on his own, and Raynell will have to figure a way out of this mess all by herself. Now, we see Ival, Namuel, and Windsor outside the secret room. The magician boy tries his magic but is unable to break through the dark barrier. Then, Windsor brings out his sword and tries to open the barrier with force, but even that is of no use, so all Ival can do now is hope for the best. The blonde prince clenches his fists and frustration, and then we see some imprisoned staff members talking about what is happening in the royal palace. One of them is about to talk about Llewellyn and his evil plan, but is told to be quiet because the staff members have taken a vow to be silent on all the events occurring during the battle of the princes for the crown. It is time for the holy wolves to fight it out, but then the staff members are shocked to see Ival coming down into the dungeon to see them. The blonde prince knows that there is one staff member who can enter his brother's room. The guilty maid worries that Ival has found out about everything and has come here to punish her. However, The blonde prince states that he's aware some of the suspects might have been threatened to obey his brother's commands. The maid is a little surprised when Ivel says that he knows how difficult it is to rebel against someone who's in power. The blonde prince further states that he understands why the staff members did not follow him until now because his wolf powers had not yet awakened at the time. The maid listens with intent as Ivel explains that Llewellyn will not hesitate before abandoning even his most loyal subjects. This makes her realize that there is no guarantee for her brother to be saved by the third prince. Ivel continues to reassure everyone that he will never abandon them, and even swears it upon his life. The blonde prince now asks the staff members for their help because his brother has stolen someone very dear to him. This makes the maid wonder if Ivel is talking about his crow girl, and then she remembers that Raynell had offered her an expensive flower. She also considers the fact that a prince like Ivel values a bird of death so highly, and is even willing to talk to his staff for their help. This prompts her to raise her head, and we can only assume that she has confessed everything to Ivel, because we are immediately shifted to Llewellyn and Raynell. The third prince tells the crow girl to become a human because there's no way his brother can save her, and on top of that, her body must be in tatters because of her injuries. Now, our hero plays out another hilarious situation in her head where she considers listening to the brat prince, but changes her mind because he is too much of a loser to entertain. Her human and crow instincts both say no to the idea, and it is shown in a rather hilarious depiction of judges passing judgment. Raynell imagines pecking a million holes into Llewellyn's face, so she acts grumpy, but it only makes the third prince more aggravated. He threatens to break every bone in Raynell's body and is about to slam her cage to the floor, but before any of this can happen, the door behind Llewellyn opens up. Now, Ivel enters the room and apologizes to his crow girl for taking so long. The blonde prince also scolds his brother for playing a prank that went too far. That's when we see Ivel striking a pose with Namuel, Windsor, and the maid behind him. The blonde prince insults his brother by calling him stupid, but Llewellyn is shocked to see how his barrier was penetrated by someone who did not have his permission. Ivel admits that the barrier was a pain to deal with, but an evil plan isn't always effective. That's when the maid shows up and reveals that she was the one who let everyone inside the room. She reminds the brat prince that he had given her his permission to enter this room because he needed her to carry out his spy plans. Llewellyn is befuddled to hear this, but rather than express his frustration, he asks the maid who she is and takes it a step further by saying he doesn't usually remember trivial things. It only makes sense for a useless prince to talk like this, and the maid realizes that she was being scared of someone who is the literal definition of an idiot. Windsor takes this chance to ridicule the maid and tell her that she should have followed a real prince like Ivel. However, the blonde prince is amazed that his brother doesn't even remember the name of the person whom he had threatened to carry out his plan. It only shows how pathetic a ruler Llewellyn would be. But the third prince lashes out at Ivel and states that he is better than him simply because his wolf powers have awakened. He even mocks his brother by saying he has to rely on his staff to help him find a crow. However, Ivel proudly declares that Raynell means a lot to him, so he is not ashamed to reach out for help despite his trust issues. The blonde prince still doesn't reveal that he can transform into a wolf, and says that he has to rely on people like Namuel and Windsor to help him out while he is a human. As a matter of fact, Ivel turns it around and Llewellyn and mocks him because he had to take help as well. The third prince is clearly incapable of understanding magic, and there was no way he could have planted the spy devices in Ivel's room all by himself. The blonde prince openly insults his brother and states that he cannot do anything without the help of others. It doesn't just end there, as Ivel shuts down Llewellyn when he tries to argue with him. We see a flashback to when the third prince was a kid, and he rushed to his mother to tell her about his wolf powers awakening before Ivel. It only goes on to show that the brat prince is nothing without his powers. His mother had even told him that his achievement was good, but he still needed to get along with his brother. This only made Llewellyn upset, and he got angry with his own mother, thus proving that he is good for nothing and doesn't deserve any respect. The brat prince even scolded his mom and said that he is the most special child because his powers had awakened. He went on to call his other siblings trash, but it only led to his mother telling him that he'd wind up alone forever. Back to the present, Llewellyn has had enough of the ridicule, so he tells everyone to shut up. The third prince starts to choke Raynell and mocks Ivel for insulting him so much. He says that he is going to rip the crow girl to shreds, and then he'll see if his brother still thinks of him as a useless brat. This puts the blonde prince in a spot of bother because the initial plan was for him to distract Llewellyn long enough for Namuel and Windsor to subdue him. However, now that the third prince is transforming into a wolf and is going to attack Raynell, Ivel can't just stand there and watch. That's when he also awakens his wolf powers and presents his majestic form in front of everyone. As expected, the witnesses are all shocked to see Ivel in his wolf form as he attacks his brother and smacks him away like a bug, saving Raynell from his evil clutches. Llewellyn cannot believe his eyes as he gets totally dominated by Ivel, who knows that he's taking a huge risk by exposing his powers, but also states that Raynell is worth the effort. The wolf prince is too overpowered for Llewellyn, who looks like a little dog when compared to his brother. He admits defeat in an instant, but Ivel comments that a wolf will bite the neck of his enemy if his loved one is put into danger. He's about to put an end to the brat prince, But then the maid calls out to Ivel and tells him that Raynell needs to be treated. Ivel smacks down Llewellyn and knocks him out, after which he goes to Raynell in his human form. The lover boy hugs his crow girl and asks her if he can heal her. Our hero obviously says yes, so he takes her to his magic doctor. The crow girl is treated with ease and she is seen resting peacefully in bed. However, she doesn't wake up and it alarms Ivel, so his doctor mentions that Raynell also has mental trauma apart from the physical injuries. While it may be treated with divine power, the doctor states that the mind is a sensitive thing, so it would be best for Raynell to recover by herself. The blonde prince clenches his fists in annoyance, but maintains that he has to protect his crow girl, so he will do whatever is necessary to keep his word. This statement alarms Namuel, so he asks Ivel if he's thinking what he's thinking. The blonde prince then reveals that he is going to declare Bosgard. Now, a narrative sequence explains to us that Bosgard is an old tradition that has been passed down through the imperial family. This is basically a holy fight which is held under the supervision of the emperor. The idea is for the candidates to the throne to battle each other in their wolf forms, until one gives in and the other emerges victorious. The duel does come with the risk of injuries, but what's worse is that it can also result in the loss of life. Nobles cannot interfere with Bosgard, and the wolf who emerges victorious shall be awarded with the throne. It is because of these risks that Bosgard is only used as a last resort when 2 or more candidates have awakened their wolf powers. Now, we see Ivel walking in dramatic fashion as the gossip continues to spread over the royal mansion. News of the princes fighting in their wolf forms has made everyone wonder how Ivel was able to awaken his powers, especially since he had shown no signs of it at all until now. People are still unable to believe that such a thing has happened, and they want to see for themselves whether the blonde prince is indeed as overpowered as the rumors state. Ivel transforms into a wolf and walks with grace, after which we learn that declaring Bosgard is rather simple. Ivel only has to become a wolf to prove his holy blood, and then he has to howl in the declaration of Bosgard so that the entire imperial palace can hear it. This is no problem at all because the wolf prince howls with dominance and his roar can be heard everywhere with the palace shaking and windows breaking. Everyone panics and runs for cover, after which we even see Wilhelm, who has managed to guess what's going on. Ivel now calls out to his brother with rage and dares him to step out into the open if he's not a coward. That's when the king steps out in his wolf form and becomes a human again after realizing his son has finally called for Bosgard. The king states the rules to Ivel and says that he cannot receive help from anyone till the battle is over. The wolf prince has no problems with this, and he wants to fight Llewellyn urgently, but the king says that the third prince has been recently injured by someone, although we all know who it is. We can see Llewellyn crying like a baby over injuries that don't really look so serious. But even then, the king says that he will have to allow his younger son some time to recover. The brat prince scolds his subjects and tells them to heal him faster, otherwise he's going to rip off their heads. Anyway, the king states that he must allow for this recovery time, because he has to permit fair play. Now, the king raises his hand and prohibits the use of any trickery or intervention until the Battle of Bosgard is done and dusted. He continues by saying all of the nobles in the royal palace are under watch, and if any of them fail to obey his orders, then death would be the only punishment served to them. While this is bad news for a trickster like Llewellyn, it isn't the best news for Namuel or Windsor either, because they will also not be able to help their prince during his time of need. Now, we move on to a lighter tone as the maid dampens a wet cloth and places it on Raynell to help with the healing process. Ivel notices this and comments on her ability to take care of others. The maid acknowledges his praise and states that she also has to look after her sick brother, so she is good with this. We also learn that the blonde prince had sent his magic doctor priest to heal the maid's brother, so she doesn't have to worry about him anymore. She states that she is forever indebted to Ivel and will do everything she can to nurse Raynell back to health. Our hero is still seen snoozing, so her lover boy hopes that she will wake up soon. Now, we move back to the alternate dimension where Raynell is in her human form. She finally opens her eyes and realizes that she's been stuck in this state of limbo for a while. Our hero panics because she knows that Ivel must be worried for her, so she scolds her crow instincts for keeping her trapped here. She even breaks the fourth wall one more time by commenting that the readers of the webtoon must have fainted by now because of their frustration with this subplot. The crow instinct says that there's still time for her to return to her human form, and it only makes Raynell angrier. She even blames the crow for allowing her to be kidnapped in the first place because she couldn't become a human and defend herself against the archmage. The crow instinct flinches its head and admits that this was somewhat its fault, but Raynell scolds it for being ignorant. She demands to be let back into her lover boy's life, but the crow instinct reasons that this might not be the best idea. Basically, Raynell might become fearful of Ivel because his face resembles that of Llewellyn. Animals are known to be cautious around their attackers, so Raynell might not be as receptive to her lover boy if she returns so soon. Our hero accepts this logic because she has seen the same thing happen in the real world with dogs. However, she also states that Ivel and Llewellyn are two completely different people and she cannot even believe that they are brothers. The crow girl goes on to scold her crow instinct for even comparing the two princes, and finds some agreement. She then holds the crow instinct and says that she will find a way to deal with her fear of Ival if it ever appears. Raynell knows that running away from her problems are not going to solve them, but more importantly, she orders the crow instinct to listen to her, because it's the one responsible for the whole mess in the first place. With no other option to present, the crow instinct listens to Raynell and agrees to send her back to Ival. However, it still maintains that it's a part of her, and she should not forget that its thoughts are a part of her subconscious. Now, the crow girl is finally taken back to the fantasy world and she becomes a human, after which she rushes to her Prince Charming and hugs him with joy. Raynell is so overcome with emotion that she falls down along with her lover boy, and apologizes for making him worry about her. She also thanks Ival for coming to save her from Llewellyn, so the blonde prince hugs her out of relief. The couple doesn't realize that the maid is watching them, and she panics after seeing our hero in her human form. Her shock results in a wet mess when she drops the water bowl, so she apologizes for her mistakes. Ival and Raynell reassure the maid that all is well, but she is still feeling guilty for allowing the crow girl to get kidnapped. Our hero consoles the maid and says that it must have taken a lot of courage for her to lead Ival to Llewellyn. However, she makes it a little funny by comparing this action to that of a rabbit confronting a wolf. The maid is confused to hear this, but then the crow girl holds her hands and thanks her for everything she's done. This makes the maid very emotional. And then Ival asks Raynell if she would like her to be her personal maid. The couple immediately agrees to the idea because the maid already knows their secret and it would be difficult for Llewellyn to come after the crow girl because the maid has his permission to enter his secret room. This is great news for our hero, so she hugs the maid and plays around with her while Ival watches them. Now, Raynell asks the maid for her name, and she finally lets us know that it's Nadia. The maid girl is very thankful to the couple for showing her kindness, and she becomes a bit dramatic by saying she will never tell on them even if a sword is pointed at her neck. This even makes Ival wonder if Nadia has learned this kind of lingo from Windsor, who is the biggest drama queen. Now, Raynell drops to the couch for some relaxation after consoling Nadia. Her lover boy also believes that the maid girl is trustworthy and will be extremely loyal to Raynell. However, our hero is hilariously surprised by the fact that Nadia doesn't want to leave her side and refuses to even take a day off. This is particularly surprising because all the other staff members have been complaining about working in front of Raynell while she was a crow. The blonde prince doesn't appreciate this, so he decides to punish the staff members, but the crow girl makes a puppy face and tells her lover boy not to do such a thing. Of course, Ival was only joking, but he still needs to set a standard, so he decides to give everyone a fair warning. There isn't much to worry about because of the state of Bosgard, but the blonde prince needs to be wary of spies. Raynell is confused by this term because she wasn't conscious when Bosgard was declared, so her lover boy explains everything to her. As expected, the crow girl is shocked because she never came across something like this in the game she played. She enters vibration mode and feels guilty for making Ival pull out such a move, but the blonde prince reassures her that it was going to happen sooner or later. He goes on to caress Raynell's cheeks, but she starts twitching uncontrollably. This makes her remember what her crow instinct had said about fearing those who resemble her attacker. Ival seems to understand this, so he uses his wolf form to console his princess. Raynell is then told that they have time to deal with this because Llewellyn has asked for extra time to recover from his injury. Now, the blonde prince tells Raynell that she can pour her heart out to him, so she hugs her lover boy and starts crying out of love. She starts talking about how scared she was when she was captured, but then we move to Windsor, who is fighting the other knights with a serious rage. A flashback shows Windsor confronting Namuel because the magician boy didn't react to Ival's wolf transformation with shock. He explains that he had given a power berry to the blonde prince, so he assumes it was the berry that gave him his wolf powers. However, this makes Windsor upset because he believes that his prince doesn't trust him despite him pledging his life towards his protection. He explains to us that he's always wanted to be Ival's knight, and it took him a lot of effort to gain his trust, especially after he had sealed himself off from others when he was a child. Windsor convinces himself that this must be a misunderstanding because Ival is still keeping him by his side. He enters the blonde prince's room and sees him in his wolf form with Raynell, who is in her crow form. This makes Windsor even more jealous of the crow girl, but then Ival transforms into his human body and asks him why he's feeling upset. Now, Windsor takes us to a flashback where he was asked to serve Llewellyn instead of Ival due to his exceptional skills. Of course, the blonde prince didn't have his wolf powers then, but Windsor still chose to serve him over the third prince. This led everyone to mock the knight for being stubborn. And then we move forward to the time when Ival was attacked by Wilhelm and his men. Windsor wanted to go find his prince and even ignored the words of the nobles who had asked him to change sides while he still could. All of his efforts were eventually a waste because Ival came back safe with a crow and has been making strange decisions ever since then. Now, we're back to the present, and Windsor asks Ival why he risked his secret for Raynell. He goes on to say that he has sworn his devotion to the blonde prince, but was still not informed about his wolf powers awakening. What's more baffling is the fact that Ival transformed into a wolf in front of everyone, just to save his crow girl from harm. The blonde prince understands what his knight is saying, so he apologizes for his behavior and says that he's well aware of how important Windsor is to him. He appreciates how much the Night Warrior has sacrificed for him, even at a time when he had no powers. However, Ivel maintains that he had to become secretive because of the attack that was planned on him. Then, he proceeds to the topic of Raynell and explains that while Windsor might find it odd that he loves a crow so much, she means the world to him. Our hero shows her human form to Windsor, and he is shocked beyond imagination, even thinking of her to be a demon bird. Raynell doesn't know if this is a good idea, but her lover boy asks her to change back into a crow for now. Now, the blonde prince tells Windsor that Raynell had eaten Namuel's power berry, which is why she can shift bodies now. She was the one who had saved him from the evil soldiers and has stuck with him all the time since then. Ivel then tells Windsor that keeping Raynell's identity a secret is extremely important to him and he wants his knight to protect her. This showcases how much Ivel trusts Windsor. And even the Night Warrior explains to us that the blonde prince was always cold to women. This made him guard him against pretty ladies all the time. But now that he has been asked to protect Raynell, it signifies a level of trust which is beyond measure. Windsor's anxiety melts away like snow on a sunny day, and he starts imagining all kinds of fantasies wherein he's protecting Ivel and Raynell from danger. He also realizes that the couple might get married and give birth to cute children who will eventually ask him to teach them sword fighting. This honor is too much for Windsor to handle, so he has another breakdown and excessively promises to protect and guard Ivel and Raynell. He swears his life on this, and his words are so loud that Raynell willingly accepts the death of her earbuds. Ivel calms him down, and then Windsor says that he must be even more loyal to his prince. He tries to read up on Boskert to offer assistance to Ivel, but is unable to find anything of use. Windsor goes crazy because it's hard to believe such an important practice is not covered in the history books, but then Namuel hilariously humbles him by finding some information in his own book. However, it's just a single sentence that everyone already knows, and it unleashes Windsor's inner beast, which wants to slice up the book for making him look like a fool. Namuel brings him back to his senses, and then Wilhelm shows up to offer his support. Neither Namuel nor Windsor is interested in listening to him, and Wilhelm understands why. However, he says he's their best hope for understanding Boskert because he knows that the current emperor was the last one to win this challenge. Is Wilhelm going to expose some dirty secrets? We continue with Wilhelm, who has just revealed to Windsor and Namuel that the current emperor was the winner of a Boskert challenge. Now, Wilhelm takes us to a flashback where we can see the king taking on his previous opponent in his wolf form. It turns out that such an incident is restricted from being recorded in the history books because the people didn't want such a tragedy to end up becoming a spectacle. The flashback continues with the wolves staring at each other with deadly intent, and then we see the king's wolf version taking down his opponent with a nasty bite to the neck. Wilhelm continues by saying the royal family has lost too many people to Boskert challenges, which is why he believes it's a terribly cruel way to settle issues. Now, we move back to the present day where Windsor and Namuel are both listening to Wilhelm. They don't really look all that impressed, as Windsor believes this is the traitor's way of trying to scare them. However, Wilhelm knows very well that they are not the kind of men to be intimidated with ease. He actually wants Ivel to come out of the Boskert battle safe and sound, because he wants him to be the next leader of the kingdom. Despite wanting the blonde prince to shed as little blood as possible, Wilhelm feels that Llewellyn will try to cheat in order to win the duel. Windsor and Namuel are surprised to hear this, and then Wilhelm states that he wants to help Ivel against his brother, but the problem is that the rules of Boskert prevent any kind of trickery or deception. So, before he leaves, Wilhelm asks Windsor and Namuel to look up the records of the staff that served the royal family, rather than those of the royal family members. These records will help our heroes confront Llewellyn and his cheating tactics with ease. Windsor and Namuel look at each other with conviction and get to work immediately. Later, we see the night boy asking to spar with Ivel as early as sunrise. The blonde prince and Raynell are a bit surprised by this behavior, especially considering the rules of Boskert. However, Windsor states that there's a way around everything because the king's personal knight would duel with him every single day till he became bedridden. This means that both of them were dueling even during the Boskert challenge. Windsor also reassures his prince that Namuel is keeping an eye on the magician's tower to check whether any of them is helping Llewellyn. Ivel is surprised to see how eager his team is to help him and also worries for their safety considering how they're trying to bend the rules. However, his crow girl reassures him by turning into her human form and saying that Windsor is right. The night boy is overjoyed to hear Raynell agreeing with him, but Ivel is still a little doubtful. That's when our hero tells him that a beast can be struck down no matter how powerful it might be. She remembers her time in the human world taking care of animals like panthers and wolves, most of whom had been struck down by something as small as an infected wound. Raynell knows that Llewellyn is going to pull some dirty trick out of his sleeve, so it would be good for Ivel to train for his duel. She then hugs her lover boy in an emotional sequence and says that it's necessary to pull out dirty tricks in order to survive. She also tells Ivel that she wants him to make it out alive, and it melts his heart. It's hard for him to say no to his crow girl, so Ivel tells Windsor to prepare the sparring sessions. Now, we see the men dueling each other with intent, but Windsor can easily spot that Ivel is a little nervous. He tells his prince that he must not let his thoughts take over his actions because the enemy can exploit such a weakness with ease. Of course, Ivel can't help his nervousness because he is fully aware of what Llewellyn might do if he were to win the duel. Watching the spar from on top of a tree is Raynell, who looks at her lover boy with dreamy eyes. However, she is even more impressed by Windsor, who has some impressive skills. The crow girl comments that she thought he was just a funny side character, but can actually walk the talk as well. Of course, Raynell also wants to be of use to Ivel, and that's when it strikes her that she is neither a noble nor a human. This means that she can carry out her spy crow fantasy and help Ivel by telling him what Llewellyn is up to. However, our hero isn't the strongest crow in the world, and she doesn't want to risk a repeat of what happened earlier. In the middle of all these thoughts, we see a couple of tweeting birds arguing with each other over some berries on the tree. It's a rather hilarious sight as the cute birds get into an ugly argument, but Raynell gets an idea after seeing them. She calls out to the angry birds and asks them to listen to her suggestion. However, the little birds look at her with creepy faces and tell her to get lost, which makes Raynell funnily intimidated by them. In the meanwhile, we see Llewellyn, who is simply crying like a little baby because he knows he doesn't stand a chance against Ivel. The third prince is aware of the size and power differences, so he believes that he might just lose within the blink of an eye. Along with Llewellyn is his archmage, who seems to be plotting something sinister. He looks at the brat prince and reassures him that he is going to win the duel and become the future emperor. Llewellyn isn't confident about this idea, but then the archmage uses his powers and seemingly transforms into a prince himself, after which he comments that Ivel is going to regret what he did to his brother. While these evil plans are being hatched, Raynell goes to Nadia and asks her to bring some snacks which are for small birds. The maid girl is a little confused by this, but assumes that these are for Raynell's friends. Our hero awkwardly acknowledges this statement, although the angry birds are far from being her buddies. Now, we see a brief flashback to the crow girl's negotiations with the little birds, both of whom are rather rude. She proceeds to have a conversation with them in bird language, which has been translated for our convenience. At first, the angry birds are a little suspicious because Raynell is able to understand them. This shouldn't be possible because even though they're birds, Raynell is a different species. That's when one of the birds asks our hero if she had eaten the power berry. The crow girl is shocked to hear this and asks them how they know about it, but the birds simply scoff at her and say that she is a kid. The birds go on to say that they have lived much longer and have seen a lot more than Raynell. This prompts our hero to wonder if there is another crow human who is living inside the royal palace. The birds state that the crow person doesn't live at the palace, but does visit from time to time with its human friend. This is big news for Raynell, because if she meets this crow person, she'll finally be able to master her crow form. She even imagines a scene where she is being given a crash course on how to be a crow after eating the power berry. Primarily, Raynell just wants to unlock her secret superpower, which she is personally hoping to be the Crowzilla atomic beams from the movie she had imagined earlier. Our hero quickly asks the angry birds if there is a way for her to meet this crow person, but they both reject the idea with scornful faces. They don't seem to know the location of the crow person, and also say that it does not like other people talking about it. The birds tell Raynell that she should look into the matter herself rather than asking them to do something for her. Raynell thinks that this effort will only be worth the risk once Bosker ends, but then the angry birds ask her what she initially wanted to tell them. Our hero switches the topic to Llewellyn, and then we see Ivel falling to the ground after getting defeated by Windsor. The night boy tells his prince that he got distracted and shouldn't allow this to happen. That's when Ivel reveals that he noticed Raynell talking to the angry birds, and it makes Windsor upset because this isn't really the time to be showing jealousy. However, Ivel is fascinated to see Raynell talking to other birds for such a long time. As a matter of fact, he even fantasizes about the birds flirting with her in a fancy fashion. Windsor is not at all impressed by his prince's behavior, and tells him that he still has a long way to go in his training. If the birds are really distracting Ivel that much, then Windsor will be more than happy to slash his apparent rivals in half. Of course, it's only natural for the night boy to become dramatic, so Ivel tells him the birds are too small to cut anyway. Also, he reaffirms that the term rival is a bit of an exaggeration. Despite this, Windsor is still eager to slice up the birds and activates a shady smile which forces Ivel to continue with his training to avoid a possible tragedy. Even Raynell hilariously feels something ominous, and worries that something bad will happen if she continues talking to the angry birds. By now, she's already told the birds about spying on Llewellyn, and they're happy to do this because they don't like the brat prince either. It turns out that Llewellyn would throw pebbles at the birds for no good reason, which has led them to remember his bratty face, even though birds aren't really good at identifying humans. Of course, our hero finds this extremely childish, which is all the more reason for her to find out what the third prince is planning for the duel. However, the angry birds strike a savage pose and tell Raynell that they expect a handsome reward for their efforts because nothing in life comes for free. The crow girl accepts their demands like a timid child and goes on to tell Ivel everything. The blonde prince is somewhat amused to hear this, especially when Raynell reveals that she's promised to bribe the birds with some snacks, which was why she had asked Nadia to make some bird treats earlier. The whole situation is quite funny for us as the audience, but Ivel doesn't seem to feel the same way. As a matter of fact, he clenches his fists and apologizes to Raynell because he thinks that she's not been living a good life ever since she was kidnapped by Llewellyn. Ivel is of the opinion that he is getting in the way of Raynell and her freedom because his involvement with her is almost like a curse. Now, the blonde prince remembers his time as a child and tells his crow girl that he had always felt anxious from an early age. This was because there was doubt about his legitimacy as a ruler due to his powers not awakening. Such a dreaded childhood would obviously have adverse effects on a young prince, so Ivel confesses that he couldn't even believe in himself after he awakened his wolf powers. The lover boy sheds a few tears and laments that he is not dependable. He feels that all his efforts only cause more pain to those he cares for. If that is the case, then he is really clueless as to how he can help Ivel. An intense shot follows as we see a reflection of Ivel as a child in the same hopeless form while he curses himself for being a burden to Raynell. This is too much for the crow girl to handle, so she holds Ivel's hand and tells him that she loves him. Our hero states that the only reason she is here is that she wants to, otherwise she can fly off to wherever she wishes. Raynell further explains to her lover boy that she had asked the other birds to spy on Llewellyn because she wanted to help him, and not because he wasn't dependable. The blonde prince is pleased to hear this, so he thanks his crow girl for always being there to rescue him from the dreaded shackles of his own past. Now, we shift from the romantic couple to Nemuel, who is having a hard time with the other magicians of the palace. As expected, most of the magicians don't want to get involved with the politics of the royal family, and it's difficult for Nemuel to get in touch with the elder magicians. At the same time, he suspects that one of the elder magicians is helping Llewellyn, but he still hasn't been able to identify who he is. All he wishes for is one tiny clue, and then we see the third prince with the archmage. The next morning, we see the angry birds enjoying their bird snacks while Raynell caws at them. Ivel, Windsor, and Nadia are all peeping on the birds, and the night boy is impressed with Raynell for using other birds as spies. Nadia is also proud of her mistress for being so smart, but her gesture only inspires Windsor to turn her into the female version of himself. He is ready to teach Nadia the ways of excessive praise and sacrifice, but Ivel comments that he cannot afford to have another Windsor roaming around him. The night boy hilariously takes this as a compliment, but Ivel and Nadia run towards Raynell after assuming that she's done with her spy chat. Everyone is eager to learn what information has just been shared with the crow girl, and Raynell strikes a savage pose as if to show that her idea was nothing short of a genius plan. We're all waiting for the big reveal, but then our hero simply caws as a human when she starts narrating the spy intel. Ivel and his team are visibly surprised to hear this, so the blonde prince asks Raynell to explain the information in a little more detail. Raynell gives it another shot and even turns into her chibi form for added drama. However, it's the same cawing sound, and Ivel reveals to her that she's speaking in bird language. This takes our hero by surprise, so she reaches out to her crow instinct for translation assistance. The crow instinct is upset that Raynell only approaches her when she needs help, but will happily allow the translation because she doesn't like Llewellyn either. Now, our hero finally explains that the third prince is regularly meeting someone in private who has a beard and a creepy voice. Since birds aren't very good at telling people apart, they were not able to describe the archmage any better, but we as the audience know exactly who they're talking about. On top of this, the birds could feel a deadly aura emanating from the archmage, which made them want to exit the scene as soon as possible. Raynell adds that the archmage didn't look as if he was from this world, so Ivel wonders if this much information will be enough for Nemuel to identify the mystery magician. He is confident in his magician boy's ability, so he goes to Nemuel and describes the archmage to him. Nemuel is made to ponder for a while, and then he comes up with a possible match to the description. This person's name is revealed to be Phafilos, who is one of the elder magicians. Nemuel remembers a rumor which claims that Phafilos has been experimenting with dark magic, which makes it all the more important for everyone to be alert during the Bosgurt battle. There's no telling what kind of trick Phafilos might pull out of his sleeve, so a backup plan is most definitely necessary. Nemuel wants to know how Ivel got hold of such critical information because it wouldn't have been easy to do so. He asks his prince if he used his secret shadow informant for this, but Ival states that he is unable to do this because of the rules of Boskert. He does state that he's found a new informant but doesn't reveal the name to Namuel, quite frankly because he doesn't know them. That's when we see Raynell hilariously fending off the angry birds who are charging at the windows asking for more snacks. Our hero is in visible discomfort, but Nadia mistakes this to be a cute moment between her mistress and her enthusiastic friends. The next day, Raynell and Ival sit down for a meal, but she senses something off about her lover boy. That's when it comes to her mind that today is the day of the Boskert challenge, and this could very well be Ival's last meal with her if things don't go as planned. Now, some narration explains to us that Boskert might be a battle between wolves, but because of the human factor, it can lead to severe consequences. Normally, a wolf should usually just surrender and accept defeat if things get too tricky for him. After all, if the injuries are too deadly, he might not even be able to hunt for the rest of his life. However, Boskert is better understood as a battle between humans in their wolf costumes, which means that the winner will keep biting till his opponent drops dead. Of course, the crow girl doesn't want her lover boy to be drenched with blood, and Ival can notice the frown on her face. He promises Raynell that he has made a backup plan thanks to the information she has managed to obtain through the spy birds. However, our hero is still feeling anxious, so Ival gets her to agree to perform a ceremony for good luck. She just has to close her eyes, and then Ival switches to Playboy mode where he kisses her lips, but with his palm in between them. The lover boy asks his princess if he can do the real thing upon winning the duel, but this overwhelms Raynell with emotion, and she transforms into a crow once again. Ival is visibly amused to see how shy his crow girl is, and he thanks her for taking away his nervousness. The blonde prince promises Raynell that he will make it out of the duel alive because she is his motivation to do so. Now, we shift to the battle dome where both Ival and Llewellyn are getting ready to face off for their battle. The king shows up and begins the proceedings, thus setting us up for an eventful encounter. Everyone in attendance starts talking about the battle, but they don't think that Ival has that much of a chance because his brother has been a wolf for longer. Obviously, Windsor doesn't take too kindly to these words, but Wilhelm tells him to calm down. Namuel also suggests punishing the gossipmongers later, but Nadia understands Windsor's feelings because she would feel the same way if anyone spoke about Raynell the same way. Raynell is also here in her crow form, and she prays for Ival as Boskert begins. The king lays down the rules for the contest, which is basically that the winner shall become the next emperor, and no cheating or additional intervention is allowed. If there is anything suspicious to be inspected, then the elder magicians are in attendance to investigate it. In the case that they find something odd, the cheater will simply have to accept the fate bestowed upon him by the other participant. However, Phofilos is among the elder magicians, so it's fair to assume that there's an evil plan lurking around somewhere. Now, Ival and Llewellyn change into their wolf forms, and an intense battle begins. However, we have to wait for the results because we are now taken to a flashback. Here, Ival becomes a narrator, and talks about how his family was peaceful and happy at one point of time, but things quickly fell apart once his mother fell ill. Priests and healers from all over the kingdom were summoned to cure her, but it was of no use. This led the king to devote all his time to his beloved wife, but he ended up neglecting his sons in the process. Eventually, Llewellyn awakened his wolf powers, but the problem was that he also became more arrogant with it. As expected, the nobles saw this as a chance to divide the empire for their own selfish reason. That's when we learn that there was a middle child, called the second prince, who had unfortunately met an early end due to what was claimed to be a horse riding accident. Of course, nobody really believed this to be an actual accident, because it was common knowledge that the children would be fighting for the throne now. It is heavily implied that Llewellyn was the one who ended his brother during this fateful incident, and to make matters worse, the queen followed soon after due to the shock of hearing the tragic news. It was this very moment that split up the imperial family, and nothing was the same after that. Now, we are back to the present where both Ival and Llewellyn are going at each other in the duel. However, the wolf prince is upset because he is fighting his own brother in a power struggle for the throne. He wishes for things to go back to the way they were when the queen was still alive, but such dreams can hardly become a reality. The fight wages on for a while, and Nadia covers her eyes because she's seen a bit too much bloodthirsty wolves. Namuel explains that both brothers are fighting with their lives, so it's expected for the battle to be drawn out. However, Wilhelm is a little confused to see Ival talking so long to finish his brother. It's obvious that the wolf prince is the more overpowered fighter, but Wilhelm assumes that Llewellyn is pulling out his hidden powers because he's been pushed into the corner. Of course, he also knows that Phofilos might have played a dirty trick, which is why the duel is going on for hours. That's when an old maid makes her appearance and comments that Wilhelm has a good eye. She asks how the battle is going on, because she has a weak eye and isn't able to see things clearly. Windsor allows the old maid to sit with his team but senses something odd about the old maid. He can feel some mysterious energy emanating from her, so he decides to keep an eye on the maid for now. Back to the battle, it looks like Ivel is the one dominating his brother, and the old maid passes a comment. Wilhelm seems to know who she is, but chooses not to say anything alarming. Instead, he says that Ivel might have a problem in the long run if this fight carries on for a while. Even Namuel senses something odd, and then he makes a critical observation. Llewellyn doesn't look like he's feeling any pain from any of the attacks Ivel is hitting him with. The third prince has red eyes that glow like a demon, which hints at the fact that he has been boosted by dark magic, thanks to Vaphilos. Raynell starts to worry because she makes an even deadlier observation. It's bad enough that Llewellyn is behaving as if he has no survival instinct, but whenever he bites Ivel, he reacts a bit differently. Raynell is able to understand this because of her experience working with animals. She remembers a critical weapon when it came to dealing with animals that would escape from time to time. This weapon was a taser, and Ivel's current reaction to Llewellyn's bites is like that of an animal that has just been struck by a taser. It all starts to make sense for the Crow Girl, but then the old maid looks at her with an evil smirk. She seems to be able to read Raynell's mind but comments that she has not come here for the Crow Girl. Instead, she will just sit and observe proceedings for now. The Battle of the Wolves continues to unfold, and Ivel's body starts to develop black scars due to his brother's electrical bite. It doesn't take long for Ivel to realize that Llewellyn is under a spell that not only increases his strength, but also his speed and overall stamina. In addition to this, Llewellyn also has been boosted by a spell that removes the sensations of fear and pain. This is exactly why the third prince has been able to fight Ivel for so long without flinching or showing any signs of slowing down. On top of that, Llewellyn also has an electricity spell casted upon him, which explains the taser attacks. Ivel knew that his brother was going to cheat, but he never thought he would use so many spells to gain an advantage. The third prince has also chosen spells which cannot be detected easily, which makes things even more tricky for Ivel. However, he only has to wait and stay calm, because of what Namuel told him earlier. We're taken to a brief flashback where Namuel tells Ivel that he's going to give him some advice, which is technically against the rules, but there's a loophole. Informing someone on how to deal with animals affected by dark magic has nothing to do with Bosker, so Namuel can offer a short explanation. Basically, the key strategy is that Ivel should not unleash all his powers upon Llewellyn, because then he will not have any energy left when his brother will unleash the hidden dark magic. Also, he must avoid getting any of Llewellyn's blood on his body, because it might lead to a curse. This explains why the Wolf Prince has not been going all out against his brother. It's a rather tricky situation because it's hard not to spill blood during a duel, but Ivel needs to minimize the damage as much as he can. Back to the battle, Namuel can observe that Ivel is following his advice, but is still unable to detect what kind of spell has been cast upon Llewellyn. The magician boy runs through some possible scenarios, but he knows that Vaphilos is an elder magician, so suggesting something suspicious to him will only get dismissed. Basically, Ivel needs to win the duel, or the king will have to bring someone in with more authority. The problem is that the other elder magicians might also be in on Llewellyn's plan, so the only person with higher authority is the chief imperial magician. However, this person does not show himself in public, and only works secretly, so it's going to be tough to call him here. Namuel knows that he'll have to bet his life on this, but he needs to collect reliable evidence because he can't just say that he has a hunch. As he wonders what to do, Raynell tries to tell him that Llewellyn is using some kind of electricity spell. However, she can only call like a crow, and it leads to a hilarious moment. Our hero laments that Namuel isn't as smart as she thought he would be, and even goes on to play a game of charades to try and get her point across. Windsor seems to realize that Raynell wants to pause Bosker, and she agrees because Ivel will get into trouble because of the electricity spell, no matter how strong he might be. Windsor cannot understand bird language, but he sides with Raynell and charges with her to stop the fight. Namuel and Wilhelm try to calm them down because there is no solid evidence to back their claims. Wilhelm even doubts Raynell's advice and calls her a bird of death, but Windsor angrily defends her, even though he used to do the same thing before. Wilhelm says that everyone needs to discuss their argument, but Nadia doesn't know what to do. The old maid tells her to wait it out for now, and then Nadia asks her which part of the palace she works at. The old maid changes the topic and brings our attention to Ivel, who is now holding down Llewellyn. Namuel figures that the Wolf Prince has figured out the spells and is going to win the duel without spilling any blood. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief, especially Raynell, but then a shocking twist unfolds. Llewellyn turns into a human and tells the king that Ivel has been cheating. A flashback shows Vaphilos telling Llewellyn that if he is unable to win against Ivel despite all the spells that have been cast upon him, then framing his brother is the only option to win. The useless prince tells the king that Ivel has been receiving assistance from Namul in the form of dark magic, so judgment needs to be passed. Everyone is in shock and disbelief over this unbelievable twist, and even Raynell is lost for words. However, the chapter ends here and so does this video. What happens next? Like, share, and subscribe to find out in the next video. See you soon. As everyone stands frozen in shock, Llewellyn gives us an evil smirk because he knows he's bamboozled us all. The third prince realizes that he is nothing compared to Ivel, because he got overpowered by his brother despite cheating with all kinds of boosted spells. However, he states that he was the winner of this battle before it even began. Now, the elder magicians start talking amongst themselves, and they believe that Namul should not have been able to deceive them, considering he is not at their level. However, Llewellyn knows this is all a fraudulent play to trick everyone into thinking that a fair evaluation is being given. Soon enough, Phelos is handed over the honors and he is to make the final decision. We all know what this means, because he has been assisting Llewellyn right from the start. The Archmage begins his deceptive speech and acknowledges that he has been experimenting with dark magic. He declares that his endeavors have prevented demons and other dark creatures from venturing into this world, because he wants to establish credibility in front of the king. Then, Phelos strikes a grand pose and calls out Ivel for using dark magic to awaken his powers. He also accuses the blonde prince of using dark magic in this battle, and it doesn't look good for our heroes. As expected, Raynell is absolutely livid with Phelos for making such a stupid decision, and even states that he would make for a great politician considering he's left his logic behind in the dark world. Phelos adds more drama by saying the battle looked suspicious right from the very beginning. He believes that Ivel's wolf form is much larger and more powerful than that of a standard prince, and his powers had awakened after his adulthood, which is a rare occurrence. It doesn't just end there, as he also points out that Ivel went missing a while ago, which means that he could have staged his own disappearance. This would have allowed him the time to awaken his powers with dark magic using Namul's help. Phelos shamelessly accuses Namul of helping Ivel even during the battle, but the magician boy says this is all a wicked lie. He reasons that he gave a power berry to Ivel, so it doesn't make sense for him to require dark magic. However, Phelos turns this around on him and states that it's nearly impossible to find a power berry. The other elder magicians agree with him, and ask for a witness because Namul's reasoning seems a bit too convenient given the timing. The magician boy counters Phelos and claims that the Archmage doesn't have any evidence to prove his wild accusations either. However, Phelos proudly says that an elder magician would never give false testimony, especially during Bosgard. Namul starts to panic because all his arguments are being used against him, so he only has one final choice. He jumps into the battle ring and kneels before the king, much to the surprise of both Windsor and Nadia. Namul swears his life on Ivel's innocence, and requests the king to summon the chief imperial magician to reveal the truth of the matter. Windsor gets inspired and joins Namul, along with Raynell. He naturally asks the king to take his life first, but hilariously requests him to keep the crow girl safe because she is cherished by Ivel. Seeing his friends risking their lives for him makes Ivel feel bad about not being able to predict Llewellyn's cowardly tactics. However, Phelos remains arrogant and mocks our heroes by saying they will never be lucky enough to see the chief imperial magician. Things are not looking good for the blonde prince, but then the king sneakily calls upon the chief imperial magician, whose name is revealed to be Mirrodin. Now, we are treated to yet another twist as the suspicious old maid sitting next to Nadia gets up and answers the king. Everyone looks on in awe and disbelief as the old maid decides to finally introduce herself. In a happy turn of events, she is revealed to be the chief imperial magician, Mirrodin. This is bad news for Llewellyn, who scolds Phelos because he had promised him that Mirrodin would not show up. As expected, the chief imperial magician traps Phelos in chains and shames him for his disgraceful methods of cheating. It turns out that Phelos had also created ghosts of the other elder magicians to pull off his grand scam. Now, the king scolds Llewellyn for using such a basic cheating method and tells him that it's been used many times before. The bratty prince tries to plead ignorance, but the king shuts him up with grace and proceeds to explain his point. While it is true that there are no records of Bosgard, the king was part of one, so he knows what happened during his own battle. He reveals that his opponent had also cast similar spells to help him win the big duel. The king had caught on to this immediately, but chose to remain silent about it. This is because he felt that a true leader should push himself to the very limits of his own strength when faced with a tricky situation. The king believes that the use of magic in battle is a cowardly act, and berates Llewellyn for not even having any loyal followers, unlike Ivel. He points out that the third prince would actually have been better off if he had kept Wilhelm by his side, because of his wit and intelligence. Wilhelm feels honored to hear this, but also expresses his humility because he doesn't know what he would have done if he was on Llewellyn's side. Even so, the king knows that Wilhelm wouldn't have let the third prince act so brainlessly, but Wilhelm states it's better to forget about what might have happened. Instead, everyone should focus on the future, so the king ridicules Llewellyn once more for using trickery to win his battle. He raises his hand and is about to end Boskert, but then we see Vafilos trying one last trick by using his dark magic. Suddenly, the third prince transforms into a demon wolf and shouts at his own father. He is not ready to have his evil dreams taken away from him, so he says that he will get rid of all the imperial family members, till he's the last one standing. Llewellyn forgets all sense of logic and attacks the king in his demon form, so Mirrodin goes to help him with his magical powers. However, Vafilos states that Boskert has still not been officially ended, so nobody can get in between the imperial family members because it might lead to controversy later on. The Archmage goes on to summon his dark magic, which keeps Windsor, Namuel, and Ivel restrained as well. It's a simple case of rotten luck as Ivel calls out to his father, who is about to get attacked by his own son. The Wolf Prince feels helpless because of his injury and curses himself for not being able to save the king. However, the twists keep coming and the crowd goes wild as our very own Raynell comes to the rescue and blocks Llewellyn's attack, much to our relief. This angers the bratty prince and he keeps thinking about ripping everyone to shreds in the middle of this chaotic sequence. It prompts him to go one step even further, and he awakens his ultimate dark powers so that he can finally fulfill his true desires. Technically, this is supposed to be a serious scene, but our hero always likes to add some hilarious drama regardless of the stakes. She states that she has just saved her father-in-law from her supposed brother-in-law, which is a pretty big deal for her. Raynell also comments that Llewellyn is turning over to the dark side only now, whereas she had believed he had already done this during puberty. Of course, Mirrodin is not in the mood for jokes, so she demands to know what Vafilos did to Llewellyn in order to trigger such rage. The Archmage takes this as a chance to brag about his dark magic, but he reveals that he didn't really have to do much for Llewellyn. He had simply awakened what was already lying dormant inside the third prince for all these years. This means that the true source of darkness was none other than the useless Llewellyn himself. Now, Vafilos realizes that he's used up too much of his power, so he makes an escape because he is actually using a temporary body. Mirrodin rushes to the king to help him, and he thanks the Crow Girl for saving his life. Mirrodin apologizes for not being able to stop Vafilos and also admits to not knowing much about the dark shadows that are still fighting our heroes. The king seems to be fine with everything that is currently happening because he had somewhat anticipated this, but Windsor and Namuel are not looking as comfortable against the dark shadows. The Night Boy is confused as to why these shadows are still here despite Vafilos vanishing, so Namuel explains that they are feeding off the mana in Llewellyn's body. The only way to stop this madness is to knock out the third prince, but that's easier said than done. Mirrodin asks the king if he still wants to see how the battle plays out, and he says that it'll be interesting to observe how Ivel handles this situation. The Wolf Prince is in a spot of bother as the dark shadows are holding him down, and his shock wounds are only getting wider and deeper. Ivel laments that things are only getting tougher for him, and he is starting to lose his sense of judgment because of all the pain and suffering he has to witness around him. However, he takes a look at Raynell, who is doing her best to fight off Llewellyn even though she is no match for him. This motivates Ivel, and he realizes that there's no point feeling sorry for himself when he has to protect his loved ones. This kicks off a thrilling sequence of events as the Wolf Prince goes into overdrive and frees himself from the dark shadows. He viciously charges at Llewellyn and bites his neck without any mercy at all. Ivel proceeds to smash his brother to the ground in an emphatic display of dominance, as Raynell, Windsor, and Namuel watch on in amazement and admiration. With such a brutal demonstration ending the battle, the king is confident that he can safely choose his successor without any doubt in his heart. He proceeds to declare Ivel as the winner of Boskert, and the Wolf Prince lets out a victorious roar with the pathetic Llewellyn incapacitated and unable to react. Loud cheers echo all over the kingdom, because the right decision has definitely been made. It finally puts an end to all the tension that was on everyone's minds leading into Boskert, and now with Ivel chosen as the new king, peace has been restored to the imperial palace. Of course, all the elder magicians who had gone into hiding during Boskert are now feeling guilty about letting Vafilos operate without any kind of supervision. They start tracking him down as a means to make up for their past mistakes, and then we see Llewellyn, who has been chained up inside a prison cell like he rightfully deserves. The third prince's fate is still uncertain, so he has to wait till a decision is made on a punishment that should fit the nature of his crimes. However, there is still some cause for concern, because the reason for this delay in judgment is that Ivel needs to give it. Unfortunately, the injuries he sustained from Boskert have kept him bandaged and unconscious for a while. This makes Raynell upset, and she is seen resting on Nadia's lap as she tries to reassure the crow girl that all will be well. She explains that the priests have already healed Ival, and Midden is looking after him as well, so it's only a matter of time before he wakes up. We even see the chief imperial magician with Namuel and Windsor as they check up on Ival. However, his hands show some kind of evil mark, which means that he could be cursed by the same dark magic as Llewellyn was. What's going to happen to Ival? Will he also give in to the dark side and create problems for the kingdom he so dearly fought to protect? After the events of the Boskert battle, we see Ival in his bed, resting from the injuries he sustained from his brother's illegal use of dark magic. We can see that the curse of the dark magic is slowly trying to take over the Wolf Prince as well, but Myrddin doesn't seem to be bothered by it. She reasons that Ival has holy wolf blood running through his veins, and it is suppressing the effects of the dark magic. However, she does maintain that the curse might be hard to control if it lingers on in Ival's body for long. Myrddin feels that the dark magic can turn the charming Ival into a menacing monster because it can accentuate his thoughts. Windsor and Namuel don't seem to have a problem with this, because they both know that the Wolf Prince is a good and noble man. It's a reasonable assumption. But the chief imperial magician decides to clarify her statement. She explains that Ival's good intentions might become misguided in the quest for peace, and he might even turn into a tyrannical ruler if things were to proceed the way they currently are. This shocks both Windsor and Namuel, because they had no idea that extreme goodness could also lead to a disaster. Myrddin is supremely experienced, so she knows the importance of moderation and how humans can never live freely in a world of darkness or even a world of light. Basically, the curse needs to be removed, but it isn't as easy as it sounds because Myrddin isn't very familiar with this field. She laments that Phafilos is the only one who can save Ival from such a situation, but then Namuel reminds her that he also has holy wolf blood running through his veins. This is exactly what the chief imperial magician needed to hear, so she gets to work immediately. It's a lengthy and tiresome process, as is pointed out by Nadia, whom Windsor instructs to observe her master from a safe distance. In the middle of all this, our hero Raynell is feeling bad for her lover boy and wishes for his speedy recovery. Tensions rise, but then Myrddin and Namuel both step out of Ival's room and gladly announce that the curse has been removed from his body. This puts a smile on everyone's faces, and Nadia asks Myrddin if she and Raynell can enter the room. Even Windsor follows suit, but Namuel decides to head back to his room for some rest. He states that he used up too much magic for the curse removal, but he doesn't sound very convincing. The sun rises upon the palace with full force, and we can see that Nadia, Raynell, and Windsor are all keeping watch on Ival. The blonde prince finally awakens from his slumber, but all he can remember is how the Boskert battle ended. He quickly remembers his crow girl, and calls out to her in a panicked state. Luckily for him, she's just taking a nap next to him, and there's nothing to worry about. Ival happily pats Raynell, and the others also realize that he's woken up. Windsor asks the blonde prince how he's feeling, and then he quickly rushes to get both Myrddin and Namuel. Now, Raynell turns into her human form, but instead of showing her lover boy some affection, she simply screams in frustration and calls him an idiot. This is obviously a hilarious moment for Ival because he didn't expect his crow girl to get so angry. She funnily smacks him on the shoulders while he tries to convince her that he's a patient. Raynell doesn't just stop there. She also mistakenly calls Boskert yogurt and then berates Ival for being so reckless during his battle. Windsor and Nadia are listening in on this conversation, but don't really know what to do about it, considering the crow girl's ferocity is because of her love. They do the right thing and rush towards the magicians before they hear some more of Raynell's lecture. Our hero does realize that she's overreacting to the whole situation, but things have been tough for her as well. She's had to sit and watch an unconscious Ival for days, so all her emotions are now bursting out without any filters. She tells her lover boy that he almost broke his promise to her, so he decides to apologize for making her worry so much. The couple shares a romantic moment as Ival wipes away Raynell's tears and even tells her to release all her anger upon him. He doesn't mind if she remains mad at him for his actions and goes on to say that he's never treasured anyone the way he's treasured Raynell. This is enough to put the crow girl's mind at ease, and she apologizes for being so dramatic. It leads to a cute moment as our hero realizes how silly she must have sounded, but Ival manages to console her. Suddenly, Myrddin and Namuel come to the scene, so Raynell turns into a crow to avoid further drama. After confirming the Wolf Prince's health, Myrddin is told about how the king would narrate countless stories about her because she was his mentor. This comes as a shock to Raynell, but the biggest surprise is yet to come, as Myrddin points out that the crow girl is able to understand human language. This makes our hero panic because her secret identity has just been exposed. There's a brief moment of panic, but then Ival confesses that he can't keep anything hidden from Myrddin. The chief imperial magician also says that there's no reason to hide Raynell anymore because the blonde prince is soon going to become the new emperor. Keeping this in mind, Ivel asks Raynell if she wants to show everyone her human form, and she gets a little confused. He reassures her that nobody can harm her now because he's won Bosgard, and Lulin is a prisoner now. This gives the crow girl confidence, and she quickly transforms in front of everyone. Our hero's appearance takes Myrddin by surprise because she had only assumed that Raynell was a smart bird. However, she quickly regains her composure and tells Ivel that his crow girl had eaten a power berry. The blonde prince is surprised to hear this, but then Myrddin explains that she's been studying the berries for a while. As a matter of fact, it was because of this research that she had met a new friend, who also transformed due to the power berry. We finally get to see the other crow person of the story, so Raynell abruptly cuts off Myrddin to ask her if this person is still alive. The crow girl is asked not to be polite because of her bird genes, but it only makes Raynell feel hilariously awkward. She asks once again if this crow person is still alive, but then Myrddin states that she had only met her when she was young. Since crows live for around 10 to 20 years, there isn't much hope for Raynell, and Ivel tries to comfort her. Now, Myrddin gets ready to answer the question, but she also asks Raynell something important. If our hero also has the same lifespan as a crow, then it means that she will pass on earlier than everyone else, including Ivel. If that is the case, what is she going to do? This puts the crow girl in a spot of bother, but she eventually regains her confidence and says that she is going to make the most of her time here with the people she cares about. She looks into Ivel's eyes with dreamy intent and reconfirms that she is going to enjoy every second she has with him. This makes Ivel a little emotional, but then Raynell switches the mood and says that she is going to look for ways to live longer. This makes the blonde prince optimistic, and he vows to use every person in the empire to look for a solution to Raynell's lifespan. The couple's behavior entertains Myrddin, but then she says that such efforts will not be necessary. First of all, she answers Raynell's question about the crow person and reveals that she's still alive. Her name turns out to be Hemphill, and she even knew about Raynell, but wasn't able to make it to the palace with Myrddin because she was feeling a bit under the weather. Basically, this means that crow people can live longer than crows, because Hemphill is still breathing. Ivel becomes overjoyed as Myrddin says that the power berry might be responsible for increasing a crow's lifespan, even though there is some more research that needs to be done. This is great news for Raynell, who drops down to the floor feeling relieved about the whole thing. Her behavior with Ivel actually reminds Myrddin of the time she was also anxious about Hemphill and her lifespan. The chief imperial magician goes on to state that Hemphill is actually a very dear friend of hers, which is why they live together. Basically, she did not want to lose Hemphill at an early age either, which is why she conducted a lot of research on the power berries. However, she faced limitations due to the fact that she couldn't find any other crow people. Now that she has come across Raynell, she can breathe a little easier. The chief imperial magician then asks Ivel and his crow girl if they can assist her with her research, and Raynell immediately agrees to it because even she has a lot of questions that need answers. However, the blonde prince wants to keep things clear, so he presents a couple of conditions. He brings out the necklace that Raynell was wearing before she got kidnapped and asks Myrddin to fix it. He also wants her to add more protective spells on the necklace so that Raynell won't ever have to face difficult situations again. Myrddin can identify that Namuel has already added some spells to the giant sapphire, and states that she can do a lot more. This means that the necklace can be used to make a pact with an elemental, more particularly an air elemental. This obviously makes sense because Raynell is a crow girl, but Namuel is only worried because such a pact would require mana and elemental affinity. He does realize that Raynell has eaten a power berry, so it might be different with her, but the risk still remains. Luckily, Myrddin reassures him that such an issue will not occur because Raynell is an animal at the end of the day. This is good news because animals have the highest elemental affinity, even more than humans. Also, considering the fact that Raynell can easily transition between human form and crow form, she should have a lot of mana within her. Myrddin then goes on to explain a secret about the power berries. It turns out that they've never been seen attached to a tree, and have always been found on the ground or other such mysterious places. Basically, this means that the power berry cannot be considered to be a fruit. Ivel becomes curious and asks what to call it then. Myrddin then states that the origin of the Valfric imperial family has always been the holy wolf, but there's a secret attached to it. The animal that was the most attached to the holy wolf was actually a black bird. This seemingly holy bird had scattered pieces of its egg all over the kingdom so that its descendant crows could gain access to it. This means that the power berries are actually fragments of the black bird's eggshell. Essentially, this implies that the power berries are meant for crows to unleash their true potential. Now that all the explanation is out of the way, Myrddin decides to begin the process of Raynell's pact with the air elemental. She says that it shouldn't be a problem, but everyone still needs to exercise caution. Winsor and Nadia agree to stand guard while Namul is asked to clear the mana around the area. He is a bit hesitant to do this but gets reassured by Mirrodin. As the chief Imperial Magician begins her spell, Ivel asks Raynell if she's alright because the look on her face is rather indicative of her nervousness. Our hero reassures her lover boy that all is well and she's just a little excited. After all, a pact with an elemental is every fantasy lover's dream, and the Crow Girl is finally getting to live it out. This also means that she'll be able to protect herself rather than having to depend on Ivel and the others for support. Now, Mirrodin takes Raynell to the world of elementals and asks her to remain calm because it might get a bit chaotic at first. She simply needs to focus on the right elemental to choose for her pact and everything will be alright. Now, Raynell is transported to an alternate dimension which feels amazing and terrifying at the same time. She is amazed to see the number of elementals around her, and the sight is a rather beautiful one. Mirrodin reminds her to call out the name of the elemental she wishes to make a pact with, and then our hero finally finds someone she likes. In a tense sequence, she gives the name Mui to this elemental and asks if she can form a pact. An engaging sequence follows, after which the Crow Girl is sent back to the real world where everyone is awaiting her. Mirrodin is quite impressed to see Raynell in a graceful new attire along with her elemental, who looks like an angel mouse. Our hero notices her clothes and realizes that this is something that happens every time she gains a new power. It's almost like a game character gaining a new level. She then looks at Mui and asks if this new relationship is acceptable. The angel mouse gives a cute look but is unsure of the whole thing for now. Raynell hugs her elemental and says that they will work things out with Mirrodin, even though she is exploding with excitement from within. The chief Imperial Magician also agrees to drop by whenever she can to help our hero with her new buddy. At that point, Ivel decides to hop in with his playboy instincts and asks Mirrodin not to take up too much of Raynell's time. This is because he would also like to be alone with his Crow Girl, and he hugs her with total confidence. Of course, this makes Raynell shy again, so she looks at Mui and starts talking about Ivel's amazing face. The blonde prince is still amazed to see his Crow Girl's modesty, but Raynell is now determined to make the most of her time here with her lover boy. Now, Ivel goes to the dungeon that's holding Llewellyn and wonders what to do with him, especially since he's been weakened by the dark magic. Ideally, he would like to get rid of him, but also needs to extract as much information